The village of Hollow Creek nestled in a valley so deep, the sun only kissed its rooftops for a few fleeting hours each day. Surrounding it were ancient woods, thick and gnarled, and the ever-present Whispering Falls. The falls weren't particularly high, but they had a peculiar quality. The water, as it cascaded over the moss-covered rocks, seemed to whisper, murmuring secrets that no one could quite decipher. Generations of Hollow Creek residents had grown up with the legend of the falls. Some said they were the voices of drowned lovers, forever trapped in the churning water. Others claimed they were the whispers of the ancient spirits that guarded the woods. But the most chilling tale, the one that kept children awake at night, was the story of the Weeping Woman. Legend had it that centuries ago, a young woman named Alara lived in the village. She was betrothed to a handsome hunter, but her heart belonged to a traveling musician. Their secret trysts were held beneath the Whispering Falls, the only witnesses their whispered promises of love. But their idyllic world shattered when the hunter discovered their forbidden love. Consumed by jealousy, he ambushed the musician in the woods and left him for dead. Alara, heartbroken and driven mad by grief, wandered into the woods, searching for her lost love. She stumbled upon the falls, the whispers mocking her sorrow. In her despair, she threw herself into the churning water, joining the whispers forever. Now, it was said, on the anniversary of her death, Alara would rise from the falls, her weeping echoing through the valley, searching for her lost love. Old Man Hemlock, the village elder and keeper of the legends, always warned the children to stay away from the falls on that night. He'd tell them how Alara's sorrow was so potent, it could pull the very life from a living soul. He'd describe her pale face, her long, dripping hair, and the mournful wail that could freeze the blood in your veins. Most villagers dismissed it as a scary story to keep children from wandering into the woods at night, but a few whispered that they had heard the weeping themselves. This year, the anniversary of Alara's death was fast approaching. A palpable tension hung in the air, thicker than the autumn mist that clung to the valley floor. A group of teenagers, eager to prove their bravery, decided to ignore Old Man Hemlock's warnings. They planned to venture to the falls on the dreaded night, determined to debunk the legend once and for all. Among them was my best friend, Ben, a skeptic to the core. He scoffed at the old stories, calling them nothing more than superstition. But even his bravado couldn't entirely mask the flicker of unease in his eyes. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was adamant. "Don't be a chicken," he'd said, a forced laugh echoing in the twilight. But deep down, I had a bad feeling about this. A feeling that the whispers of the falls were more than just water on rocks. The days leading up to the anniversary were filled with a growing sense of dread. The weather seemed to mirror the village's unease. The sky was perpetually overcast, a heavy blanket of gray pressing down on us. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the whispers of the falls further than usual, their mournful sound seeping into our homes, our dreams. Even the animals seemed to sense the approaching darkness. Birdsong was replaced by an unsettling silence, and the normally playful squirrels disappeared from the village green. Old Man Hemlock was more agitated than I'd ever seen him. He went from house to house, his weathered face etched with worry, repeating his warnings, pleading with people to stay indoors on the night of the anniversary. "The Weeping Woman is restless this year," he'd rasp, his voice trembling. "Her sorrow is strong. She seeks solace, and she will not be denied." Most people humored him, nodding politely and closing their doors. But I saw the fear in their eyes, the way they avoided looking towards the woods. Ben, however, remained defiant. He mocked Old Man Hemlock's warnings, calling him a senile old fool. He gathered his friends, a group of teenagers who were more interested in proving their courage than heeding the wisdom of their elders. They planned their expedition to the falls with a reckless abandon that both terrified and fascinated me. I wanted to warn them, to beg them to reconsider, but I knew it would be futile. They were caught up in the thrill of the forbidden, the allure of the unknown. As the day of the anniversary dawned, a thick fog rolled into the valley, shrouding everything in an eerie silence. The air was heavy, charged with an unseen energy. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I spent the day pacing my room, my anxiety growing with each passing hour. I tried to distract myself, but the whispers of the falls seemed to follow me everywhere, their mournful sound echoing in my mind. As dusk approached, the village fell silent. Lights flickered in windows, casting long, distorted shadows on the fog-shrouded streets. The only sound was the relentless pounding of my heart. I knew Ben and his friends would be heading to the falls soon. I pictured them, their youthful faces pale in the moonlight, their laughter echoing through the silent woods, oblivious to the danger that awaited them. I wanted to stop them, but I was paralyzed by fear. All I could do was watch and wait, praying that the legend was just a story, that the weeping woman was nothing more than a figment of our collective imagination. The moon hung like a skeletal fingernail in the inky sky, barely piercing the oppressive fog that clung to Hollow Creek. It was the kind of fog that swallowed sound, that made the familiar seem alien and menacing. I huddled by my window, peering into the swirling gray, my breath catching in my throat with every rustle of leaves, every creak of the old house. I imagined Ben and his friends making their way through the woods, their bravado slowly crumbling as the darkness deepened and the whispers of the falls grew louder. Suddenly, a dog howled in the distance, a long, mournful cry that sent shivers down my spine. It was followed by another howl, closer this time, and then another, until the night was filled with a chorus of canine lament. It was an unsettling sound, a primal warning that something was terribly wrong. The dogs of Hollow Creek never howled like that. They were normally placid creatures, but tonight they were restless, their fear palpable. Then, I heard it. A sound that cut through the fog and the howling, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a wail. A long, drawn-out, heart-wrenching wail that seemed to emanate from the falls themselves. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated sorrow, a sound that spoke of centuries of pain and loss. It was the wail of the weeping woman. The wail grew louder, closer, echoing through the valley, vibrating in my bones. It was a sound that burrowed into my soul, filling me with a terror I had never experienced before. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The wail was everywhere, inside my head, a constant, agonizing reminder of the legend, of the vengeful spirit that roamed the woods. I stumbled back from the window, my legs trembling. I wanted to hide, to crawl under the covers and pretend that none of this was happening, but I knew I couldn't. I had to know what was happening at the falls. I grabbed my coat and a flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I knew I was being foolish, that I was walking into danger, but I couldn't leave Ben and his friends to face whatever was out there alone. As I stepped out into the fog, the wail intensified, reaching a crescendo of grief and despair. The dogs were going crazy, barking and snarling, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. The fog swirled around me, obscuring everything, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I stumbled through the streets, my heart pounding in my chest, the wail guiding me towards the falls. The air grew colder, heavier, and the whispers became clearer, more distinct. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were words. Words of pain, of anger, of revenge. And then, through the fog, I saw something. A figure, pale and shimmering, moving towards the falls. It was the weeping woman. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, gliding through the fog like a phantom. It was tall and slender, draped in what looked like a tattered white gown. Long, dark hair streamed behind it, swirling in the mist like tendrils of smoke. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see the outline of its arms, long and thin, reaching out towards the falls. Terror threatened to overwhelm me, but a strange sense of compulsion propelled me forward. I had to see, had to know what was happening. My flashlight beam danced erratically, swallowed by the fog, but I pressed on, my feet slipping on the muddy path. The wailing intensified, a gut-wrenching symphony of sorrow that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. As I neared the falls, I saw another figure emerge from the swirling mist. It was Ben. He stood frozen, his face a mask of horror, his eyes fixed on the spectral figure before him. His friends were nowhere to be seen. "Ben!" I shouted, My voice barely a croak. He didn't react. He just stood there, transfixed, as if he were in a trance. The weeping woman moved closer to the falls, her wail reaching a fever pitch. The water churned violently, the spray rising like ghostly arms. And then, I saw it. Another figure, rising from the depths of the falls. It was a man, his body pale and bloated, his eyes wide with terror. He reached out towards the weeping woman, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The weeping woman embraced him, her wail turning into a low, guttural moan. The two figures merged, becoming one, and then, with a final, agonizing cry, they plunged back into the churning water. The falls roared, the spray engulfing them, and then, just as suddenly, everything was silent. The fog began to dissipate, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Trees were uprooted, rocks were shattered, and the ground was littered with debris. Ben still stood there, his body trembling, his eyes wide with shock. I rushed towards him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ben, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just stared at the falls, his face pale and drawn. And then, he started to cry. Not a loud, sobbing cry, but a low, mournful wail that echoed through the valley. It was the wail of someone who had seen too much, who had witnessed the depths of human despair. It was the wail of someone who had lost a part of himself in the fog. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if afraid to disturb the scene. Ben's wail gradually subsided, leaving a hollow ache in the stillness. I put my arm around him, feeling his body tremble against mine. He was in shock, I knew, but at least he was alive. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the only sound the gentle rush of the falls, now strangely calm. The fog had completely lifted, revealing the full extent of the devastation. It was as if a tornado had ripped through the area, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. But there was something else, something more disturbing than the physical damage. The air itself felt different, charged with a strange energy, a lingering sense of sorrow and despair. Finally, Ben stirred. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. What happened?" he stammered, his voice hoarse. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain what we had just witnessed? How could I put into words the horror of the weeping woman, the despair of the drowned man, the sheer, raw power of the legend come to life? I don't know, I mumbled, my own voice trembling. But we need to get out of here. He nodded numbly, and we turned to leave. As we walked away from the falls, I glanced back over my shoulder. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting an eerie glow on the churning water. And for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the falls, a pale, shimmering figure with long, flowing hair. But when I blinked, it was gone. We stumbled through the woods, our legs heavy, our minds reeling. We didn't speak, but the shared horror bound us together. As we emerged from the trees, we saw a group of villagers approaching, their faces etched with worry. They had heard the wail, the howling of the dogs, and they had come to see what had happened. Old Man Hemlock was among them, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He looked at Ben and me, his gaze lingering on Ben's tear-stained face. He didn't need to ask what we had seen. He knew. "The weeping woman has claimed another soul," he said softly, his voice heavy with grief. "May he find peace in her embrace." The villagers gathered around us, their voices murmuring in hushed tones. They led us back to the village, their hands on our shoulders, their presence a comforting anchor in the storm. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been changed by what we had witnessed. We had glimpsed the darkness that lay at the heart of the legend, and it had left its mark on our souls. We were no longer just witnesses to the story. We were part of it. Back in the village, a pall hung over everything. The usual comforting glow of lamplight in the windows seemed diminished, swallowed by the lingering darkness that clung to Hollow Creek. No one spoke of what had happened at the falls, but the unspoken horror filled every room, every heart. Ben was withdrawn, haunted. He barely spoke, his eyes distant, fixed on something only he could see. He refused to sleep, terrified of the nightmares that plagued him, visions of the weeping woman, the drowned man, and the echoing wail that tore through his dreams. I tried to comfort him, but my words felt hollow, inadequate. I, too, was shaken. The image of the two figures merging at the falls, the raw agony of the wail, was seared into my memory. But something else disturbed me, something I couldn't quite explain. It was a feeling, a sense of being watched, of an unseen presence lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. It started subtly, a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision, a whisper of air on the back of my neck when no one was there, the unsettling feeling of eyes following me in the darkness. At first, I dismissed it as nerves, the lingering effects of the night at the falls. But it grew stronger, more persistent, until I couldn't ignore it any longer. I began to see things, shadows that danced in the corners of my room, forming grotesque shapes in the dim light, faces that flickered in the reflections of mirrors, their features distorted, malevolent. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a figure slipping behind a tree, a hand reaching out from the darkness, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The whispers returned, too, but they were different now. They weren't just mournful wails carried on the wind. They were whispers close to my ear, murmuring my name, speaking words I couldn't understand, but which filled me with a primal dread. They seemed to be coming from inside the house, from the shadows that clung to the walls, from the darkness that lurked in the corners of my room. One night, I woke to find myself staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the window. As I lay there, I heard a sound, a soft, rhythmic dripping. At first, I thought it was the rain, but it wasn't raining. The sound was coming from inside the room. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened carefully. The dripping was coming from the corner of the room, near the closet. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn it on. As the light flickered to life, I saw it. A dark, viscous liquid was dripping from the closet door, pooling on the floor. It wasn't water. It was thick, black, and it smelled foul, like decay, like death. And as I stared at it, I saw something move within the darkness of the closet. A shadow, shifting and writhing, taking on a vaguely humanoid form. And then, I heard a whisper, right next to my ear, a voice that was both familiar and utterly alien. It whispered my name, and then it said, "You're next." The whisper, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through me. "You're next." I recoiled, scrambling back against the headboard, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow in the closet writhed, growing larger, more defined. I could make out the vague outline of a figure, tall, gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. Its head was bowed, the long, dark hair obscuring its face. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was the weeping woman, or something worse. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound that echoed through the silent house. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely dial. But as I tried to call for help, the phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. The light from the lamp flickered and died, plunging the room back into darkness. I was trapped, paralyzed with fear. I watched as the figure in the closet began to move. It glided across the room, its movements fluid and unnatural, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. The dripping from the closet door intensified, the foul stench of decay filling the air. The figure stopped at the foot of my bed. I could feel its presence, a cold, heavy weight that pressed down on me, suffocating me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it would go away, that it was all a nightmare. But when I opened them again, it was still there, looming over me, its face still hidden in shadow. It reached out a hand, long and skeletal, and touched my cheek. The touch was icy cold, like the hand of a corpse. I flinched, my body trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to scream again, but no sound would come out. I was frozen, trapped in a waking nightmare. The figure leaned closer, and I could feel its breath on my face, a cold, stale wind that smelled of death and decay. And then, it whispered again, its voice a guttural rasp that seemed to claw at my sanity. "Join us," it hissed. I felt my consciousness slipping away, my mind succumbing to the terror. The room began to spin, the walls closing in on me. The figure's face, still shrouded in darkness, seemed to grow larger, filling my entire field of vision. I tried to fight it, to cling to reality, but the darkness was too strong. It was pulling me in, swallowing me whole. And then, everything went black. I woke up on the floor, my body aching, my head throbbing. The room was bathed in the pale light of dawn. The closet door was open, but there was nothing inside. The dripping had stopped. The foul stench was gone. I sat up, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? I looked at my hand. There, on my palm, was a dark, viscous stain. It smelled of decay. I knew then that it hadn't been a dream. The weeping woman was real. She was in the house, and she wanted me. I was losing my grip on reality, my sanity fraying at the edges. I was descending into madness, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I wouldn't be able to escape. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent. They were inside my head now, whispering my name, beckoning me to join them in the darkness. I was next. The stain on my hand, a dark, viscous reminder of the night's terror, wouldn't wash off. I scrubbed at it until my skin was raw, but it remained, a constant, chilling mark. It was as if the weeping woman had branded me, claiming me as her own. The smell of decay lingered around me, no matter how much I showered or changed my clothes. It was a phantom scent, perceptible only to me, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. Sleep became a battlefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I was plunged into a nightmarish realm where the weeping woman reigned supreme. I saw her in the shadows, heard her wail echoing through the empty corridors of my mind. She would reach for me, her icy touch sending shivers down my spine, her whispers promising eternal torment. I would wake up screaming, my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, the mark on my hand burning like a brand. The whispers followed me everywhere, seeping into my waking hours, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. They whispered my name in crowded rooms, hissed threats in the rustling leaves, and mocked my fear in the creaking floorboards. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I going mad? Was the weeping woman a figment of my imagination, a manifestation of my own repressed fears? But then, I would look at the mark on my hand, the stain that wouldn't disappear, the smell of decay that clung to me like a shroud, and I knew that it was real. The weeping woman was real, and she was coming for me. My behavior became erratic. I was jumpy, paranoid, seeing threats in every shadow, hearing whispers in every sound. I isolated myself, afraid to be around anyone, convinced that the weeping woman was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I stopped going to work, neglecting my responsibilities, my life spiraling out of control. Sarah, my wife, was worried. She saw the change in me, the fear that haunted my eyes, the erratic behavior that made her fear for my sanity. She tried to talk to me, to offer help, but I pushed her away, convinced that she couldn't understand, that she would never understand the terror that consumed me. I didn't want to put her in danger. The weeping woman was after me, and I didn't want her to become a target as well. One day, Sarah found me huddled in a corner of our bedroom, rocking back and forth, my eyes fixed on the closet. I was whispering to myself, repeating the same phrase over and over again. She's here. She's watching me. Sarah tried to calm me, but I was beyond reason. I lashed out at her, accusing her of being part of the weeping woman's plan, of trying to trap me. Sarah was heartbroken, terrified. She didn't know what to do. That night, Sarah left. She couldn't take it anymore. She packed her bags and left, leaving me alone in the house with the whispers and the shadows. I didn't blame her. I knew I was losing my mind. The weeping woman had one. She had driven me to the brink of madness, and now, she was ready to claim her prize. I was next. Alone in the house, the silence was no longer empty, but filled with 1,000 whispers. They slithered from the walls, seeped from the floorboards, and coiled around me like phantom snakes. They were everywhere, a constant chorus of voices vying for my attention, each one whispering secrets, threats, and promises of oblivion. The house itself seemed to be alive, breathing with a malevolent energy that pulsed through its veins. The darkness deepened, the shadows stretching and contorting, forming grotesque shapes that danced at the edge of my vision. Faces peered from the gloom, their eyes burning with malice, their mouths twisted into silent screams. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of decay, the phantom scent clinging to me like a second skin. I wandered through the house like a ghost, my footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The furniture seemed to watch me, the paintings on the walls leered, and the mirrors reflected a distorted image of myself, a stranger with haunted eyes and a haunted soul. The weeping woman was everywhere. I saw her in the flickering candlelight, her pale figure gliding through the hallways, her wail echoing through the empty rooms. I heard her whispers in the rustling curtains, her laughter in the creaking stairs. She was toying with me, driving me deeper into madness, preparing me for my final descent. I tried to fight it, to cling to the remnants of my sanity. I read books, watched movies, listened to music, anything to distract myself from the whispers, the shadows, the ever-present sense of dread. But it was no use. The weeping woman had infiltrated my mind, her presence poisoning my thoughts, twisting my perceptions. One day, I found myself in the attic, drawn there by an unseen force. The attic was the heart of the house, the source of its malevolent energy. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, the whispers louder here, more insistent. I wandered through the maze of forgotten objects, each one whispering its own story of loss and despair. And then, I saw it. The trunk. The trunk that had contained the music box that had started it all. It was open, its contents scattered across the floor. I knelt down, my fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the lid. The symbols seemed to writhe and shift, their meaning elusive, yet somehow menacing. As I touched the trunk, a wave of energy surged through me. I saw visions, flashes of the past, of the weeping woman's sorrow, of her lover's betrayal, of her descent into madness. I saw the village, Hollow Creek, as it was centuries ago, a place of fear and superstition, where the weeping woman was not just a legend, but a terrifying reality. I understood then. The weeping woman was not just a ghost, a vengeful spirit. She was a curse, a contagion that spread through the house, through the village, through anyone who dared to cross her path. She fed on fear, on despair, on the darkness that lurked within the human soul. And I was her next victim. I stumbled back from the trunk, my mind reeling. I had to get out of the house, escape the curse before it consumed me completely. But I knew it was too late. The weeping woman had me in her grasp, and she wouldn't let me go. I was trapped in the house of whispers, doomed to become another victim of the legend, another voice in the chorus of the damned. The house was no longer a home, but a prison. Every room, every corner, was filled with the weeping woman's presence. I couldn't escape her gaze, her whispers, her chilling touch. She was everywhere, a constant reminder of my impending doom. My days blurred into a nightmarish haze. I wandered through the house like a lost soul, my mind a battlefield where reason and madness clashed. I tried to fight back, to cling to the remnants of my sanity, but the weeping woman's influence was too strong. She was slowly eroding my will, breaking me down, preparing me for her final embrace. The shadows became my companions. They danced around me, whispering secrets, offering solace, promising an end to my torment. I found myself drawn to them, seeking comfort in their darkness, their embrace. They were the only ones who understood my fear, my despair, my growing sense of hopelessness. One night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw her, the weeping woman. She stood beside my bed, her pale face illuminated by the moonlight, her eyes filled with a chilling sadness. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to join her, to become part of her eternal sorrow, to lose myself in the darkness. I reached out to her, my hand trembling, and she took it. Her touch was icy cold, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. The whispers in my head subsided, the shadows retreated, and the fear that had consumed me for so long began to fade. She led me out of the bed, out of the room, out of the house. We walked through the fog-shrouded streets of Hollow Creek, the village silent and still, the only sound our footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. We reached the falls, the water churning and frothing, the spray rising like ghostly arms. The weeping woman turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and longing. She reached out and touched my face, her fingers tracing the lines of my fear, my despair. And then, she kissed me. Her lips were cold, like ice, but the kiss was filled with a strange tenderness, a yearning that transcended the boundaries of life and death. I felt myself being drawn into her, my body merging with hers, my soul dissolving into her sorrow. The whispers returned, but they were different now. They were no longer threatening, no longer menacing. They were welcoming, soothing, promising an end to my pain. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the darkness. The weeping woman's embrace was cold, but it was also a release. I was no longer alone. I was part of her, part of the legend, part of the eternal sorrow that flowed through the falls. I was home. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness and cold. I felt myself falling, tumbling through an endless abyss, the whispers of the weeping woman echoing around me like a mournful chorus. Then, just as suddenly, I stopped. I opened my eyes and found myself lying on the cold, damp ground. The fog was gone, the moon shining brightly overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the ravaged landscape. The falls roared nearby, their churning water reflecting the moonlight like liquid silver. I sat up, my body aching, my mind reeling. I looked at my hands, expecting to see the mark, the stain of decay, but my skin was clean. I felt different, lighter, somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I stood up and looked around. The devastation at the falls was even worse than I remembered. Trees were uprooted, rocks were shattered, the ground scarred and broken. It was as if a great battle had taken place here, a battle between the living and the dead. I remembered the kiss, the cold embrace of the weeping woman, the feeling of merging with her, of becoming part of her sorrow. Had I died? Was this some kind of afterlife? I walked towards the falls, drawn by an unseen force. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the edge of the water, was a figure, pale and shimmering, just like the weeping woman. But it wasn't her. It was me. Or, rather, it was a spectral image of me, my body translucent, my eyes hollow. I watched as the spectral me reached out towards the falls, towards the churning water, and then, with a silent scream, plunged into the depths. I recoiled, horrified. What did it mean? Was I trapped here, doomed to relive my death over and over again? Was I now part of the legend, another victim claimed by the weeping woman? I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had to get out of here, escape this nightmare, find some way back to the world of the living. But as I turned to leave, I heard a sound. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A sob. I froze, my senses on high alert. The sob came again, this time louder, more distinct. It was coming from the falls. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold all over again. Floating just beneath the surface of the water, I saw a face. A young, terrified face. It was Ben. He was alive. Or at least, partly alive. He was trapped between worlds, his body submerged in the icy water, his spirit clinging to the edge of consciousness. He was the one who had been sobbing, his sorrow echoing through the falls. I knew then what I had to do. I had to save him. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't leave him there, trapped in the weeping woman's embrace, doomed to become another voice in her chorus of sorrow. I had to break the curse, break the cycle of pain and despair that had haunted Hollow Creek for centuries. I had to face the weeping woman, not as a victim, but as a rescuer. I had to find the strength within myself to confront the darkness and bring Ben back from the brink. I had to find the echo of my own scream and turn it into a cry of defiance. Seeing Ben trapped in the icy grip of the falls ignited a fire within me. The terror that had paralyzed me before was replaced by a fierce determination. I wouldn't let him become another victim, another whisper in the weeping woman's mournful song. I waded into the shallows, the water biting at my skin, the cold seeping into my bones. I reached out towards Ben, his face pale and lifeless beneath the surface. His eyes were closed, but I could see the fear etched on his features, the lingering echo of his terror. "Ben!" I shouted, my voice echoing across the water. "Ben, can you hear me?" There was no response. He remained still, trapped in the liminal space between life and death. I knew I had to act fast. I didn't know how to bring him back, but I couldn't give up. I closed my eyes, focusing all my energy, all my will, on Ben. I pictured him, his laughter, his bravado, the flicker of fear in his eyes before he faced the falls. I remembered the wail, the agonizing cry of the weeping woman, the chilling kiss that had almost consumed me. And then, I remembered the spectral image of myself, plunging into the water, becoming one with the legend. A realization dawned on me. I had crossed over, even if only for a moment. I had touched the realm of the dead, felt the weeping woman's sorrow, and returned. I understood now. To save Ben, I had to bargain with the weeping woman, to offer her something she craved. I opened my eyes and looked towards the falls, my gaze fixed on the churning water. "Weeping woman," I called out, my voice ringing with a newfound strength. "I know you're here. I know you can hear me." The water swirled and churned, the spray rising like a ghostly mist. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, their voices filled with curiosity, with anticipation. "I want to make a bargain," I said, my voice unwavering. "I want Ben back. In exchange, I will give you what you want." The whispers fell silent. The water calmed, the spray receding. A figure began to emerge from the depths, pale and shimmering, her long hair swirling around her like a shroud. It was the weeping woman. She glided towards me, her eyes filled with an ancient sorrow, an eternal longing. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough. I knew what she wanted. She wanted release. She wanted someone to share her burden, to take her place in the cycle of pain and despair. "I will stay," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I will take Ben's place. I will become part of your legend, another voice in your mournful song. But only if you let him go." The weeping woman stopped, her gaze piercing mine. She searched my eyes, looking for any sign of deceit, any flicker of fear. She saw my resolve, my willingness to sacrifice myself for Ben. After a long, agonizing moment, she nodded. A single tear rolled down her pale cheek, a tear of sorrow, but also, perhaps, of relief. She turned towards the falls and extended her hand. The water parted, revealing Ben's body. He floated to the surface, his eyes still closed, his face still pale. The weeping woman looked at me one last time, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and then she turned and disappeared back into the depths of the falls. The water closed over her, the whispers fading into silence. Ben gasped, his body convulsing as he coughed up water. He opened his eyes, his gaze confused, disoriented. He looked at me, his eyes widening with recognition. What happened?" he stammered, his voice hoarse. I smiled at him, a bittersweet smile. "You're back," I said softly. "You're safe now." And then, I collapsed. Ben's return to Hollow Creek was met with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. He remembered nothing of his encounter with the weeping woman, nothing of his time trapped in the falls. He woke up in his own bed, weak and disoriented, with no recollection of the events that had transpired. The villagers, eager to avoid the truth, attributed his disappearance and reappearance to a bad fall and a bout of amnesia. Old Man Hemlock, however, knew better. He saw the lingering fear in Ben's eyes, the haunted look that mirrored my own. He understood the price that had been paid for Ben's return, the sacrifice that had been made to appease the weeping woman. He looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding, and I knew that he knew. I was different now. The encounter with the weeping woman, the bargain we had struck, had changed me in ways I couldn't comprehend. I felt a strange detachment from the world, a sense of being both present and absent, a ghost in my own life. The whispers were gone, the shadows had retreated, but the weeping woman's presence lingered, a constant reminder of the price I had paid. I couldn't tell Ben the truth. I couldn't burden him with the knowledge of my sacrifice, the weight of my impending doom. He had suffered enough. He deserved to live his life free from the fear, the despair, the curse that had haunted Hollow Creek for generations. So, I kept silent. I smiled and pretended that everything was normal, that I was the same person I had always been. But inside, I was dying. The weeping woman's mark, though invisible to the naked eye, was etched on my soul, a constant reminder of my fate. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Ben recovered his health, his memory slowly returning, though the events of that night remained a blank. He went back to school, back to his friends, back to his life. He was happy, carefree, oblivious to the sacrifice that had been made on his behalf. I watched him from afar, my heart aching with a mixture of love and sorrow. I knew that our time together was limited, that the weeping woman would soon come to claim her prize. But I cherished every moment, every smile, every laugh. I would give anything to protect him, to shield him from the darkness that awaited me. One day, as I was walking through the woods, I came across the falls. The water churned and frothed, the spray rising like a ghostly mist. I stood there for a long time, listening to the roar of the water, the whispers of the wind. I felt a strange pull towards the falls, a yearning to return to the embrace of the weeping woman, to fulfill my part of the bargain. I knew that I couldn't stay in Hollow Creek any longer. I couldn't bear to watch Ben live his life, knowing that my time was running out, that I would soon be leaving him forever. I had to leave, to find a way to protect him, to shield him from the curse that had claimed me. So, I packed my bags and said goodbye to Ben. I told him that I had to leave, that I had to find myself, that I would be back someday. He was sad to see me go, but he understood. He hugged me tightly, his eyes filled with tears. "I'll miss you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll miss you too," I whispered, my heart breaking. And then, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the village, the falls, the legend, and the boy I loved. Leaving Hollow Creek was like tearing a piece of myself away. Every step I took away from the village, away from Ben, felt like a betrayal, a severing of the invisible thread that connected us. But I knew it was necessary. I couldn't stay, couldn't risk Ben being drawn back into the darkness, couldn't bear the pain of watching him live while I faded away. I wandered, a ghost in my own life, drifting from town to town, city to city. I kept to the fringes of society, avoiding close contact with anyone, afraid of the curse I carried, the darkness that clung to me like a shroud. I was a pariah, an outcast, marked by the weeping woman's touch. The world outside Hollow Creek was different. People didn't believe in legends, in curses, in the supernatural. They dismissed such tales as superstition, folklore, the imaginings of simple minds. I tried to blend in, to live a normal life, but the whispers followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of my fate. I saw the weeping woman in every shadow, heard her wail in every gust of wind, felt her cold touch in every passing breeze. She was always there, just beyond the edge of my perception, waiting for me, beckoning me to return to her embrace. I researched the legend, desperate to find a way to break the curse, to escape the weeping woman's grasp. I read ancient texts, consulted with occultists, sought the wisdom of those who claimed to understand the supernatural. But no one could help me. The weeping woman's curse was ancient, powerful, woven into the very fabric of Hollow Creek, into the very essence of the falls. I learned about the history of the curse, the origins of the weeping woman's sorrow, the cycle of pain and revenge that had plagued the village for centuries. I discovered that the curse was not just about the weeping woman herself, but about the darkness that resided within the human heart, the capacity for love and betrayal, for grief and vengeance. I realized that the only way to break the curse was to confront that darkness, to understand it, to forgive it. But how could I forgive the weeping woman for what she had done to me, for what she had taken from me? How could I forgive the world for its cruelty, its indifference, its capacity for pain? I continued to wander, searching for answers, searching for a way to find peace. I met other outcasts, other wanderers, people who carried their own burdens, their own scars. We shared our stories, our pain, our hopes, and our fears. We found solace in each other's company, a sense of belonging in our shared isolation. But even among these kindred spirits, I felt alone. The weeping woman's presence separated me from them, a barrier that no one could cross. I was trapped in my own personal hell, haunted by the past, consumed by the present, and dreading the future. I knew that my journey was far from over. I still had to face the weeping woman, to confront the darkness within myself, to find a way to break the curse that had claimed me. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, I needed guidance, I needed a miracle, and I had a feeling that I knew where to find it. I had to go back to Hollow Creek. The decision to return to Hollow Creek was a difficult one. It meant facing my fears, confronting the darkness that had consumed me, and risking everything I had left. But I knew it was the only way. I couldn't run anymore. I had to confront the weeping woman, break the curse, and find a way to reclaim my life. The journey back was long and arduous. Every mile I traveled closer to Hollow Creek. The weight of the curse grew heavier, the whispers more insistent. I felt a pull towards the village, a magnetic force drawing me back to the source of my pain, my salvation. As I approached Hollow Creek, the familiar landscape brought a flood of memories of Ben, of Sarah, of the life I had left behind. The village nestled in the valley, shrouded in the same mist that had haunted my nightmares, seemed both welcoming and menacing. It was a place of beauty and terror, of love and loss, a place where legends came to life. I entered the village under the cover of darkness, avoiding the gaze of the villagers, afraid of their reactions. I was a stranger now, an outcast returning to the place of his torment. I made my way to my old house, the house of whispers, the house where my nightmare had begun. The house was just as I had left it, dust-covered and silent. But the air was thick with a palpable energy, the lingering presence of the weeping woman. I wandered through the empty rooms, each one filled with echoes of the past, memories of my life before the curse, before the darkness. I went to the attic, the heart of the house, the source of its power. The trunk was still there, open, its contents scattered across the floor. I knelt down and touched the carvings, the symbols that had haunted my dreams. As I did, a wave of energy surged through me, and I saw visions of the past, of the weeping woman's sorrow, of the curse that had plagued Hollow Creek for centuries. I understood then. The curse wasn't just about the weeping woman. It was about the darkness within the human heart, the capacity for love and betrayal, for grief and vengeance. It was about the choices we make, the paths we choose, the consequences of our actions. I realized that I couldn't break the curse by fighting the weeping woman, by trying to destroy her. She was a part of me, a part of the darkness that resided within my own soul. To break the curse, I had to confront that darkness, to understand it, to forgive it. I closed my eyes and focused on the image of the weeping woman, her face filled with sorrow, her eyes filled with longing. I thought about her pain, her loss, her eternal torment. And then, I forgave her. I forgave her for what she had done to me, for what she had taken from me. I forgave her for the fear, the despair, the madness that had consumed me. I forgave her for being a victim of the darkness, just as I had been. As I did, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The whispers subsided, the shadows retreated, and the house fell silent. The weeping woman's presence was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer a threat, but a presence of understanding, of acceptance, of peace. I opened my eyes and looked around the attic. The trunk was still there, but the symbols were no longer menacing. They were just carvings, reminders of the past, of the choices that had been made, of the pain that had been endured. I knew then that I had broken the curse, not by destroying the weeping woman, but by understanding her, by forgiving her, by accepting the darkness within myself. I was free. The silence in the attic was profound, Not the oppressive, whisper-filled silence of before, but a peaceful quiet, the kind that follows a storm. The weight I had carried for so long, the fear, the despair, the sense of being hunted, had finally lifted. I felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The darkness that had clung to me like a shroud had dissipated, leaving behind a sense of clarity, a quiet understanding. I looked around the attic, no longer seeing a repository of fear and forgotten things, but a space filled with history, with stories waiting to be told. The trunk, the source of so much terror, seemed less menacing now, its carvings no longer symbols of a curse, but remnants of a past tragedy. I left the attic and walked through the house, each room now filled with a different kind of echo, not whispers of dread, but memories of laughter, of warmth, of a life that, despite the darkness, had held moments of joy. I remembered Sarah, her smile, her touch, the love we had shared. The pain of her leaving was still there, but it was no longer a raw, festering wound. It was a scar, a reminder of what I had lost, but also a testament to the love that had once been. I left the house and walked out into the dawn. The sky was a canvas of soft colors, the sun peeking over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the valley. Hollow Creek seemed different, too. The oppressive mist that had always clung to it was gone, replaced by a clear, crisp air. The village seemed to breathe, to awaken, to embrace the new day. I walked through the streets, no longer hiding in the shadows, no longer afraid of being seen. The villagers I encountered looked at me with curiosity, some with recognition, but there was no fear in their eyes, no whispers of dread. They saw me as I was, a man returning home. I went to the falls. The water still churned, but the roar was no longer a mournful wail, but the sound of life, of energy, of renewal. I stood at the edge, looking into the depths, not with fear, but with a sense of peace. The weeping woman was still there, I knew, but she was no longer a vengeful spirit, a source of terror. She was a part of the falls, a part of the history of Hollow Creek, a part of the cycle of life and death, of love and loss. I thought about Ben, about his life, about the future that awaited him. I knew that I couldn't stay in Hollow Creek. My presence would be a constant reminder of the past, of the darkness that had once gripped the village. I had to move on, to let Ben live his life free from the shadow of the curse. I left Hollow Creek once again, but this time, it was different. I wasn't running, I wasn't hiding. I was walking towards the future, towards a new beginning. I carried the memory of the weeping woman, the knowledge of the darkness that resided within the human heart, but I also carried the hope of forgiveness, the power of understanding, the light of a new dawn. My journey was far from over, but I knew that I was finally on the right path. The path towards peace, towards healing, towards a life free from the whispers of the past. My journey after leaving Hollow Creek was one of healing, not just for myself, but for others. The weight of the curse, the fear that had consumed me, had transformed into something else, empathy. I understood the pain of loss, the burden of secrets, the crippling weight of fear. And I knew that I could use my experience, my understanding, to help others who were struggling in the darkness. I didn't seek out the supernatural. I wasn't a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator. My focus was on the human heart, on the struggles that we all face, grief, trauma, despair. I became a counselor, a listener, a guide for those who were lost in the shadows. I traveled from town to town, offering my services to those who needed them. I didn't charge for my help. I only asked for a willingness to open up, to share the burdens they carried, to find the light within themselves. I met people from all walks of life, people who had experienced loss, people who had suffered abuse, people who were haunted by their past. I listened to their stories, their pain, their hopes, and their fears. I offered them my understanding, my empathy, my unwavering belief in their capacity for healing. I shared my own story, not the details of the weeping woman, but the essence of my journey. The descent into darkness, the struggle to find hope, the power of forgiveness. I told them that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a flicker of light, a spark of resilience that can be rekindled. I helped people confront their demons, not by fighting them, but by understanding them, by accepting them, by finding a way to integrate them into their lives. I taught them the power of self-compassion, the importance of forgiveness, the transformative potential of love. My work was not easy. I encountered resistance, skepticism, and even hostility. Some people were too afraid to face their own darkness, too entrenched in their pain to believe that healing was possible. But I didn't give up. I knew that even one person touched by hope, one soul freed from the shadows, was worth all the struggle. Slowly, I began to heal myself. The memories of the weeping woman, the fear that had once gripped me, began to fade. They were replaced by a sense of purpose, a feeling of gratitude, a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. I realized that the curse, the darkness, was not something external, something that could be destroyed. It was a part of the human experience, a reflection of our capacity for both good and evil, for love and hate, for hope and despair. It was within each of us, waiting to be acknowledged, understood, and integrated. My journey was not about escaping the darkness, but about embracing it, about finding the light within it, about transforming it into something positive, something that could help others find their own way out of the shadows. It was about echoing hope, one soul at a time. Years passed. The wanderer's path had become my life. I continued to travel, offering solace and guidance to those lost in the shadows, sharing my story not as a tale of horror, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The name I had once carried, the identity I had known in Hollow Creek, faded, replaced by something new, something forged in the crucible of fear and hope. I became known simply as the Wanderer, a silent beacon of understanding in a world often shrouded in darkness. But Hollow Creek remained. The legend of the weeping woman persisted, whispered in hushed tones, a chilling reminder of the village's past. I hadn't returned, not out of fear, but out of respect. I knew that my presence would forever be a reminder of the terror, a shadow hanging over the lives of those who remained. They needed to move on, to heal, to rebuild their lives without the constant reminder of the curse. Yet, a part of me longed for Hollow Creek, not for the fear, not for the darkness, but for the connection that still lingered, a thread woven through the fabric of my being. I thought of Ben, of Sarah, of the life I had left behind. I wondered if they remembered me, if they ever thought of me, if they had found peace in the years that had passed. One day, I felt a pull, a familiar tug on my soul. It was a call, a summons, a whisper carried on the wind. It was Hollow Creek, reaching out to me. I knew that it was time to return, time to face the past, time to bridge the gap between the world I had left behind and the life I had forged. I packed my meager belongings and set out once more, my heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The journey back was different this time. The weight of the curse was gone, replaced by a sense of homecoming, a feeling of returning to a place that, despite its darkness, still held a part of my heart. As I approached Hollow Creek, the familiar landscape brought a wave of nostalgia. The valley, the woods, the falls, they were all etched in my memory, a part of my story, a part of who I had become. I entered the village under the cloak of twilight, slipping through the quiet streets, avoiding the curious gazes of the villagers. I made my way to the falls, the source of the legend, the heart of the darkness. The falls were different now. The churning water seemed calmer, the roar less menacing, the spray no longer a ghostly mist, but a gentle veil. The weeping woman's presence was still there, but it was not a presence of fear, but a presence of understanding, of acceptance, of peace. I stood at the edge of the falls, looking into the depths, and I saw her. Not as a terrifying specter, but as a reflection of myself, a part of my own soul, a reminder of the darkness that I had faced and overcome. And then, I saw him, an older man, his face etched with the lines of time and experience, but his eyes still holding a spark of recognition. It was Ben. He stood on the other side of the falls, his gaze fixed on the water, lost in thought. He didn't see me at first. He was looking into the past, into the depths of his own memories. I called out his name, my voice soft, hesitant. He turned, his eyes widening with surprise, with disbelief, with a flicker of recognition. Is it really you? He whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. It's me, Ben, I said. I've come home. The years melted away as Ben and I stood facing each other across the Whispering Falls. The fear, the pain, the shared trauma of our youth seemed distant now, replaced by a profound sense of connection, a bond forged in the crucible of the legend. He crossed the small wooden bridge that spanned the narrowest part of the falls, his steps slow, hesitant, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. When he reached me, his eyes searched mine, seeking confirmation, seeking the truth of my return. It's really you, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a hand, his touch gentle, tentative, as if afraid I might disappear. I took his hand, the warmth of his touch grounding me in the present. I'm here, Ben, I said, my voice filled with a quiet joy. I've come home. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes, erasing the lines of worry and age that had etched themselves on his face. Welcome back, he said, his voice filled with warmth. It's been a long time. We stood there for a moment, just holding hands, the silence filled with unspoken words, with shared memories, with the weight of the years that had passed. Then, Ben pulled me into a hug, a warm, comforting embrace that spoke of forgiveness, of acceptance, of a bond that had endured the test of time. I never thought I'd see you again, he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I thought you were gone. I was, I said softly, but I came back. I had to. We stepped back, our eyes meeting, a silent conversation passing between us. He knew, I realized. He knew about the bargain, about the sacrifice, about the darkness that had claimed me. He didn't ask for details, he didn't need to. He understood. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. For everything. There's nothing to thank me for, I said. I did what I had to do. We walked away from the falls, the roar of the water fading into the background. We talked about the years that had passed, about our lives, about our families. Ben had married, had children, had built a life in Hollow Creek, a life free from the fear that had once haunted him. He told me about Sarah, about how she had eventually remarried, found happiness again. He told me that she had never forgotten me, that she had often wondered what had become of me. He told me that she had died a few years ago, peacefully, surrounded by her loved ones. The news of Sarah's death brought a pang of sadness, a reminder of what I had lost. But it was a gentle sadness, a bittersweet ache, not the raw, agonizing pain of before. I had made peace with the past, with the choices I had made, with the losses I had endured. We visited Sarah's grave, a simple stone marker in the small village cemetery. We stood there in silence, remembering her, her laughter, her love, the light she had brought into our lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, we walked back to Ben's house, a cozy cottage on the edge of the village. His children, now grown, welcomed me with open arms, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. They had heard stories about me, about the wanderer, the man who had saved their father from the falls. They didn't know the full story, but they knew that I was a part of their family's history, a part of the legend of Hollow Creek. That night, I slept in Ben's guest room, a small, comfortable space filled with the warmth of family, the echoes of laughter, the peace of home. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, the whispers finally silent, the shadows finally gone. I was home. The days that followed in Hollow Creek were a quiet symphony of reconnection and healing. I spent time with Ben and his family, sharing meals, laughter, and stories, catching up on the years that had been lost. I explored the village, revisiting familiar places, each one now imbued with a different kind of memory, not of fear, but of peace, of acceptance, of a life reclaimed. I returned to the falls often, not drawn by fear, but by a sense of belonging. I would sit by the water's edge, listening to the roar, the whispers, the eternal song of the falls. The weeping woman's presence was still there, but it was no longer a threat, a source of terror. She was a part of the falls, a part of the history of Hollow Creek, a part of me. I realized that I had become a keeper of the whispers, a guardian of the legend. Not in the way I had feared, as a victim trapped in the cycle of sorrow, but as a bridge between the past and the present, between the darkness and the light. I understood that the legend of the weeping woman was not just a story of horror, but a story of love and loss, of grief and forgiveness, of the enduring power of the human spirit. It was a story that needed to be told, not to instill fear, but to remind us of our capacity for both darkness and light, for both destruction and healing. I decided to stay in Hollow Creek, not as a resident, but as a guardian, a keeper of the legend, a bridge between the worlds. I built a small cabin in the woods, near the falls, a place where I could be close to the whispers, close to the heart of the legend. I continued to travel, to share my story, to offer guidance to those who were lost in the shadows. But I always returned to Hollow Creek, to the falls, to the weeping woman, to the place where my journey had begun, and where it had finally come full circle. Ben and his family often visited me at the cabin. We would sit by the fire, sharing stories, laughing, remembering the past, and looking towards the future. His children, now young adults, would come to me with questions about the legend, about the weeping woman, about the darkness that lurked in the human heart. I would share with them the true story, the story of forgiveness, of acceptance, of the power of love to overcome even the deepest sorrow. And so, the legend of the weeping woman continued, not as a tale of terror, but as a story of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a flicker of light, a spark of resilience, a possibility for healing. And I, the wanderer, the keeper of the whispers, the bridge between the worlds, would continue to share that story, echoing hope across the land, one soul at a time. The whispers were no longer a curse, but a song of hope, a song of life, a song of love. And I was finally at peace.